Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, knowing your break-even cost in farming is crucial. With high input prices this year, we talk about how this can affect your choice of crop rotation for the future. Ben covers planting tips for late planted wheat. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure you can access the latest episodes of Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. And if you're a Mershman Seeds dealer, download our Mershman Delivers app on the Apple App Store to start tracking your seed delivery down to the second.
Welcome to this week's episode of Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Turk and Lynn, and today let's talk about what's on farmers' minds. Lynn, what have you been hearing and what do you got for us this week?
As guys are starting to wrap up a little bit, we're getting some questions on decisions for next year. A lot of questions related to the corn versus bean on the acre side of it. So I went back, kind of surfed the web a little bit here and found a pretty good article from the Indiana Prairie Farmer. They interviewed Michael Langmeyer. He's an economist for Purdue. And granted, this is information from back in September, so kind of added a little bit to what we know with what fertilizer prices have gone. So the big takeaway on this is decently yielding corn ground, bean ground. We're talking 215 to 65 bushel on corn and beans. He's in September was predicting 432 and 1074 as the break-even prices for those particular acres. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say we can add another 10 to 15 cents on that just based off of the fertilizer movements, especially the anhydrous. He talked a little bit about as we get into some more marginal ground, that number can actually go up into the 460s on corn and then up above $11 on beans. So the big thing to think about as we're going into the planting portion of the season is coming back from my roots previously as an ag lender, break even to me was always one of the biggest things that I would try to work with my borrowers and making sure you know what your break even is at all times. That's the biggest key, because to me, you can't sell anything unless you know what your break even is. Granted, you might not always be able to sell above that, but at least you know potentially what your profit's going to be, and on the backside what your loss is going to be. So going through that, related to that question that we're getting, break even is important to look at it from an operational standpoint. Don't just take the internet. I mean, it's a great baseline that they provided for us, but every person's going to be a little bit different in their operations. Some guys maybe don't fertilize every year on bean ground. They do the 2-year rotation or 2-year fertilizer plan. Maybe they're one pass on beans, one pass on corn. So take a look at that from a farm basis. Use these references as a guide, but make sure that you know what your operations profit margin is there, or potential for profit margin is on your break even. So back to that, I guess just a little bit, when we're looking at some of this from a finance standpoint, just know this year, cash is king. When we've got a decent prices, our inputs were a little bit behind from last year, so know that cash is king. Hold on to cash if you have the option to do that. There was an adage in banking that no one has ever gone broke paying taxes. There's been people gone broke from trying to avoid paying taxes. So any of our accountants out there that are listening, I apologize for this advice. And going into this, protect your net worth. Net worth is kind of the farm safety blanket per se, that if you have a net worth, you can get through some rocky times. You can rely back on some of that and use maybe some of your equity to kick the can down the road if you get into a bumpy spot. And right now, net worth has had a lot of conversation with land prices, with iron, the way that it's appreciated. So when you're evaluating your net worth, especially with your banker, look at it from an earned standpoint. Don't look at it from a inflationary standpoint, because you can move that train up and down all you want, and if it's an earned net worth, that means you're moving forward. If you're just changing it to the times, you might miss something that could be out there if you had a year that was worse than what it really could have been, because you're kind of hiding it behind some of the market inflation on that. The other one that is pretty important, I think, with this is knowing your inventory too at all times. Knowing what you have priced, knowing what you have opened. It sounds very simple, but you'd be surprised by you know, there's some out there that don't know that. They just kind of have a rough idea. So just be cognizant of that as you're going into your annual reviews. Your banker's going to love you if you know what you have on hand, know what you have open, and just have a game plan. I mean, all the people that we talk to about you know, marketing is just have a plan, stick to the plan. Don't get too over emotional, and you're going to end up all right. So when we look at this and we have the conversation with guys as far as corn versus beans for next year, really the conversation that I've had, and I think the conversation Ben and Turk that you guys have had with that is, you know, going back, taking a look at what your break even is, and then looking to see what you can, you know, physically handle and what you can get. And I think Turk's going to allude to this a little bit later. You know, make sure you can get the product for your particular need. And then the other thing would be is make sure you're not making a one-year bet that's going to affect yourself down the line. Is this going to screw up your rotation 2, 3, 4 years down the line? Are you doing something that you've never done before? Are you prepared for that, to have a catastrophe? And the biggest thing I think that we're, you know, dealing with is, you know, talking to guys about the particulars of their ground. Is it a marginal piece of ground that, yeah, I mean, corn potentially looks like it could be expensive to, you know, produce 120, 130 bushels on there, is beans maybe our route to go on that. And as we talk about that, there is some things that we need to discuss as far as, you know, bean on bean, because that seems to be the biggest one, is that guys are looking to go, you know, bean on bean rotation on that. So what, you know, from my end, we're talking a little bit about don't plant the same variety twice, and I think you've got a little bit on that on why the reasons why you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, so one of the things we think about when we're talking bean on bean is you're not planting that twice, because we've talked about that before. You know, you don't want the inoculum buildup. So let's say you have a product out there that's got a susceptible frog eye score, and you know, you had 65 bushel beans this year, but they might have been 75 bushel if you had, you know, a better frog eye score out there. You have all that inoculum built up. If the right environment hits next year, you know, that 65 bushel that you had this year with a 75 bushel potential could be 55, because you're knocking it that hard, and you may need to be spending more money on your fungicides and such things. So always rotating your beans, not to have the same bean with the same disease package time in and time out, is always a good idea. Knowing what your cyst levels are, and very, very few farmers know what their cyst levels are. Yep. If you can get into the only bean that we have in our lineup currently is a 2.5 Osage, but if you can get into that Osage where it's got a Peking gene, or if you're using one of our competitors' Peking products, or there's a different, other than the PI 88788, there's a different alteration of that's out there in the market right now. If you can be using one of those beans, that's definitely going to help lower those cyst numbers, so that cyst isn't necessarily going to be an issue. If you were to put one out of the NPK, zinc, boron, you know, some of those products, what would be my top pick would probably be to make sure your potash levels are correct. Mm-hmm. So if you're going out there and chasing, if you only had to put one thing down and you didn't want to spend any money on DAP, I would make sure that you're putting, if you're not in the 2-year, or if you think that your corn may have used all of what you had out there the previous year, potash is pretty important. You know, I would be probably looking 70 bushel, 65 bushel soybean crop takes about 100 pounds of actual K there. So, you know, be looking at what you'd potentially be putting down for that. Lime is always important. I know we're kind of talking about high prices and high input costs as well, but lime is always important on beans. I always like seeing a 6.5, 6.6 if you can get into that, a little bit above the halfway mark there on your soil pHs, and just know what's out there for insect pressure. There's not a lot we can do about that, but know what pressures you've had, and always be scouting, because you may have higher insect levels out there from overwintering pests and such. Yeah, those are some of the things I think about. I guess when I think about
it's really important to stress that if you're going to go beans on beans, you got to use our seed treatment. I mean, that's a must. Yep. To make sure you're using a seed treatment with Saltro in it, because those cyst levels are going to increase. Your disease in general is going to increase on a bean on bean.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. For getting that plant out of the ground, and the Merchman Bonus Coated Plus, you know, we can't brag on it enough about how well it controls a lot of those things. To go back to your conversation just a little bit, Lynn, those marginal acres is probably where we would start considering pushing the bean on bean. And in my opinion, if I was to go out there, you know, and take a stab at, you know, what are the acres that I would do it, it would be the marginal acre where, you know, we were talking about ground that is to the west of us, and how, you know, 1 out of every 5 years you hit a home run, but then you kind of halfway muddle through on those variable acres. Those would probably be the acres that I would be considering bean on bean.
Correct. And the other thing too is, you know, we've had in certain areas not great corn yields, so that's driven the APH down. So when you're looking at your security blanket there, is your security blanket going to be enough to cover your cost of production and potentially, you know, your cost of living? Because most of our customers, I mean, we don't do this for fun. We do this to make money. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're making money and moving forward. You know, we kind of threw out a number, you know, that 120 bushel ground seems to kind of be where that number might look very enticing. And like I said, this is all dependent on your operation. If your land cost is a lot different than somebody else's, obviously the numbers move around quite a bit. So we're speaking in a lot of generalizations, but it seems like that 120 to 130 bushel corn ground might have a strong indication to really sit down and burn some lead and see what your profit levels are looking like. Because with the anhydrous prices the way they are, you know, there is some caveats where you can pull back on some of the fertilization, but you know, some of the stuff that we've seen, actually worse ground requires almost as much as some of the good ground, because we don't have that organic matter to, you know, come up with some of the free nitrogen. I guess it's not really free nitrogen, but we got to roll the coals to it a little bit to be able to sustain that. So that would be, you know, the type of acres, if you haven't already put it in wheat, to look at that. And really, you know, checking out what your break even and what your security blanket is. I know we're repeating that quite a bit, but that can't hammer that hard enough.
You hit the nail on the head with the nitrogen efficiency. Those 220, 230 bushel consistent corn ground, they have some of them as low as 60% utilization, so it only takes 0.6 pounds of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. A lot of that marginal ground can take a pound of nitrogen or 1.2 pounds of nitrogen to produce that bushel of corn. So those are a lot of the things that you gotta consider when you're rolling there. So you rolled into my second topic, or my second note here is late planted wheat. We are, believe it or not, in southeast Iowa, you know, south of Interstate 80, we're still rolling wheat out to customers. Guys that are planting this really late wheat. Usually my cutoff for our area is the 15th of November. Because I've seen it work, and I know we can make the 15th of November work. But when we're planting wheat late, we want to make sure at this point in time of the year we're at least 2 million seeds per pound, which for the seed sizes that we have this year, that could be 150 to 160, 70 pounds per acre. So you want to make sure you're getting it on thick, because you're not going to get the really productive tillering that makes yield in the fall. You'll get a little bit of tillering in the spring, but that's not near as productive for making yield. You want to be planting that stuff you want to be planting your wheat at more than an inch. You want to make sure you're getting it at 1.5 inches, getting it down in the ground good. You want to make sure you're planting treated wheat. At this point in time, treatment is extremely important, because our wheat has a biostimulant in it. That biostimulant helps that germination process, and you want really strong seedlings out there. Hopefully we have one more warm shot of weather for these guys that are sticking it in the ground. I'm not concerned with the soil temps where we're at 50, especially in southeast Iowa. And as we travel south, we still have a lot of 50+ degree soil temps. One more shot of warm weather will at least get that stuff to spike out of the ground, but all we really need is that seed to germ out. So,
and get anchored.
And get anchored into the ground, you're correct. So,
and we've had instances the last 2 years of guys basically putting it in the ground, getting it to germinate, and have been extremely satisfied. So it's not quite the risk that maybe it was in years past, or even untreated. Obviously, you're still taking a risk by planting it this late, but that's the nature of the beast.
I think the most important thing this time of year is that planting depth and getting that root system anchored, because the tendency is when I want to get it out of ground quicker so I can get more growth. But it's the depth of that root system that keeps your winter kill down.
Absolutely, I would totally agree with that. One of the other things that we have is the big talk right now is herbicide shortages and logistic issues. There is a really good podcast that Alex will link to for us. It's by Farmers Business Network. They have actually acquired herbicides in the past 3 years. Like, they've bought a few companies, so they're actually wholesale distributors, and they have 3 guys that are really smart on there that I listen to. And if you listen to a certain portion of it, you can fast forward through because they give you actual examples, and I'm not as versed as they would be. They said they had 80 years of experience between 2 of the guys sitting there in the ag chem world. So if you want to listen to herbicides, you can listen to the herbicide section of it. You can listen to the insecticide portion of it. You can listen to the fungicide portion of it. These are the actives that are short. These are what we switch to. These are the actives that are short. These are what we switch to. And I will let somebody that's been doing it for 40 years help guys navigate through the challenges that we have now. And if you end up buying stuff from them, you end up buying stuff from them. So it's a little plug for FBN and the guys that know what they're talking about there. And I think the last thing that I have is we have lots of data coming in. So we'll be sharing data with you guys on wind percentage on soybeans, hopefully some MS technology data coming up in the next hopefully week or 2. I have a lot of our data done for wind percentages in our own plots that we have. We've had Southeast Iowa Research did some soybean seed treatment studies. Our soybean seed treatment looks phenomenal compared to a couple of the competitors that we were testing out to make sure we're not missing anything. So be looking forward to that data as we come and move forward. So what do you got, Turk?
Well, we talked about the crop report came out, and as expected, there wasn't a lot of change in the numbers with the exception of soybeans. Soybean numbers actually went down for the yield. For this year actually went down lower than what they were in September, which was a surprise to the trade, and so prices shot up on soybeans and corn as well, and so it was a really a report that we typically don't get this time of year with the surprise that we had in there, but since that report came out, prices kind of settled back down. Now they're going up. I think that we can say that the harvest low is in, and now we can look forward to moving forward with more supply information to move the market, and or demand information to move the market. I know that I heard some saying that there's going to be a meeting with China to talk about trade, and to be honest with you, I'm a little fearful that this administration is going to get us the deal that we need, but time will tell. Supplies are short. Everybody knows supplies are short, and the price is going to have to stay up in order to get that. So to kind of talk what we were talking about, what you were talking about, Lynn, is the don't get too crazy on your marketing on this year's crop until you actually have your products in your shed, your inputs in your shed. Because if you have to switch out next year and you got the wrong chemicals in the shed, then it's going to be a major problem. Mm-hmm. And same way with pre-emergence. We'll talk about that more next spring, I'm sure. Don't get pre-emergence down and then not be able to get the rest of the inputs. So you got to make sure you got them all before you start doing a lot of marketing as well, in my opinion. I think marketing is going to be important this year because the drought is the latest drought map is, pretty much there's very little in Iowa, and it's really pretty much east of the Mississippi there is no drought. West of the Mississippi, we still have some areas, but they're mostly in the extreme southwest, and so North Dakota and all of those have had a lot of rain here lately. Iowa's had a lot of rain, so a lot of drought has been alleviated, which means we're going to be going in about one more good rain event or snow event up there will pretty much end this drought that we're in for our part of the country. Now, it can still get dry again. but at least we're going into this year a lot better shape than we were a year ago at this time for drought. So the opportunity for us to grow even a bigger crop next year is still there, which could put pressure on prices. And then we always have South America with their corn and their soybeans. You know, their numbers will affect the market as we go along. But and things are looking pretty decent for those folks as well down there. So the potential to grow a lot soybeans this year, and the price war that's going to happen between corn and soybeans is going to can move these numbers one way or another. Right now, I think the trade's looking for about 90 million acres, both corn and soybeans, which is significant change, but I think it's already in the market. And in the case of corn, I think they want more acres than that, and so they're going to be trying to move that price up. So I think it's an opportunity that you don't want to miss. You want to keep, know your numbers and know where you're going, and we'll be talking more about marketing as we go forward.
Absolutely. So we are missing Joe this week, Turk. Mm-hmm. Do you have some of his? Joe
did send me some.
There we go. Joke. Let's close her out this week.
Okay. So the first corny joke I got, Ben, is why was the potato chip factory only open 1 day per week?
I don't know.
Because they only have one Friday.
I like that one. That was kind of funny. That's a good one.
Okay. And the other one is a poodle and a collie were walking together when the poodle suddenly unloaded on his friend. "My life is a mess," he said. "My owner's mean. My girlfriend ran away with a schnauzer, and I'm as jittery as a cat." And the collie says, "Why don't you go see a psychiatrist?" And the poodle says, "I can't. I'm not allowed on a couch."
Well, I think that wraps it up for this week. I hope everybody is safe. I hope harvest is continuing to progress if you're not done yet. And I wanted to throw one shameless plug in there for if you're a Merchman Seeds dealer, make sure you download the Merchman Delivers app to help see when your truck is getting scheduled. That's a new app that we got that gives you down to the second delivery time. So shameless plug there, but I hope everybody has a good week. Be safe, and we'll see you next week.